The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have another fantastic episode for you today. But before we jump into the conversation, let me take a minute to remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes and a whole lot more. You probably missed sign up for the certification, although if you want to get on the next round, just let us know. Please reach out. We definitely want to get you involved. We're already on the road for it, so we'll see how that goes, but definitely check out information about the NAILD LSC if you want to learn more about lighting controls. Additionally, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do this without you, MW Connect. Check them out, mwconnect.us. You might know them as McWong, but they are now MW Connect, still the same great trusted partner in North America. They still provide the award-winning Bluetooth lighting control solutions, are really ready to support your projects, and they really stand behind all of their technology. Really awesome technology. We just had them on our live stream at Light Fair last week. You should check that out on our YouTube channel. But, I really can't say enough good things about this, especially because of the education support that they are really putting into everything that they do. They have a lot of great documentation and guidance on their website. So check it out, mwconnect.us. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today we've got Ryan. Ryan, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
So my name is Ryan Krueger. I'm the energy efficiency manager for, it is called EnerChange. So we're funded by Xcel Energy, CenterPoint Energy, and the Minnesota Department of Commerce. So we are a cost-free resource for any nonprofit in that territory. So basically we have 3 engineers on staff. I handle onboarding and engaging all our clients, and we drop engineers into buildings, figure out how the system is lit, how the HVAC system runs, figure out where to optimize that system. And lighting is a huge component of that. And we work with a lot of churches. So you get dropped into a church and then figure out, oh, they want to convert the sanctuary to LED. Oh, okay. How do we actually do that? And there's a lot of analog controls. So you just kind of get into the weeds on lighting. And that's what I like doing. So it's just kind of fun of, I started at an ESCO and worked 3 years doing direct install where you're just screwing in A19s. And then I worked 3 years of outside sales and lighting, and now 3 years for EnerChange. And so as LED is becoming saturated, there's a need for additional energy savings, and controls are where the market is leaning, and how we have to effectively deploy it. Otherwise, the client calls me because I built a good rapport with them. And it's like, I don't know. There's 2 companies in the state I know that know how to properly solve this problem. But
well, and you used a term here that we use a lot that, if you don't mind me asking you to define it, what is an ESCO?
Energy Services Conservation Organization.
Yeah, and so what does an ESCO do?
So they're funded. Yeah, so they're funded by the utility. So a percentage of every bill that you pay, call it 1%, goes into a huge bucket. That bucket is then turned into programs, specifically rebates and energy conservation organizations, like how EnerChange is funded. But there's also 2 or 3 programs that are there specifically funded for for-profit entities. They may have a triple bonus rebate. And so you tag the right program depending on what project you're working on. And specifically what we do is nonprofits. So that's kind of the world that I work in. But because I've been in this industry for long enough, I know okay, Xcel just released a bonus rebate on their prescriptive tubes. It went from $3 to $6. That tells me that there's a lot of funding available being moved. And so you just kind of watch of like, how do you, and from the ground level, it's like cost-effective projects are what actually get implemented. And when you tag a grant, a good rebate, a good financing opportunity, that's when projects go. And it takes a lot of understanding of the utilities to like wade through it.
And so, from your vantage point out in Minnesota, we get a different kind of vantage point out here in the Boston area, but out in the Minnesotan area, what are you seeing for rebates when it comes to lighting controls?
For our largest electric utility, it's 8 cents per connected watt. So they just run it that way. And we can run it through a custom rebate where it's just a total cents per kW reduction based on if it's new construction, it would be based on TRM or I guess technical resource manuals, perception of what the systems should consume based on higher efficiency. But yeah, just either prescriptive or custom. And like on prescriptive projects, call it 50,000 square foot building with, 50 high bays and then 20 to 30 2x4s and a bunch of recess cans. And when you connect that in, that rebates, call it 30 grand, the controls portion of it, that it needs a breakdown of line item, what the aux sensor is actually controlling and the total controlled wattage. Once you rattle those numbers in, it's less than $1,000 on a $30,000 rebate. Right. But as those high bay rebates continue to drop, that controls rebate is going to continue to rise.
Right. And so you're basically seeing that because you can't really get the high bay upgrade to LED rebate anymore, there's less low hanging fruit for these rebates, and so you kind of need to be more creative and look at the lighting controls options for rebates.
Yeah, and that's in the built environment. On the new construction, it's there every time, where it's just literally, and like the utility should have somebody internally that understands the process flow for that. But sometimes they don't, where then it lands on us to provide the utility the right information that they need to run the rebate.
And so from your perspective, how effective are these rebates right now? Are you seeing more adoption for lighting controls, or are you still seeing some resistance to lighting controls?
I'm still seeing a bit of resistance. And really it just boils down to project cost. And specifically nonprofits, where it's like, if it's a completely new build out and they're like, they can build the capital campaign to pull $1 million, sure. But if it is a sanctuary of a church that they can retrofit it for 20 grand, or they can do new fixtures and it's 30 to 40 grand, but that 30 to 40 grand has the LLLC component to it. So then you need to tie it. Like if it's like a Bluetooth mesh controlled system, like you're going to have to train the demographic that you're selling that service to on how to use those. And like, I know of a couple contractors that can do that well. So I'll position it where like bid it out both ways. But like if someone asks for it, they'll get it. Like there's LEED certified buildings that I've been in where they have a complex control system and it's failing, and they need to pay whatever it costs to replace that system. So the dollar value doesn't matter. And like in newer buildings, when things fail, it's just replace it and it doesn't matter what it costs. And a lot of the time they are connecting the systems because it's code in certain instances, and then in others it's just is what it is. There's certain applications where the wireless controls end up, and not necessarily in lighting. I've seen it in solar a couple times where the nodes of the system are placed in advantageous spots where the connection can't get through the concrete block, and then the system goes offline for an extended period of time. It's like if you have a solar system that the controls aren't communicating and it's offline for 6 weeks, that's 6 weeks of production that we're seeing in the utility bills. But then, like, for certain areas, trenching power is so much more work when you don't have cell service. Like certain ski hill applications, wireless is harder to do. But in the city, like, I can take a live stream or do a podcast from my phone at my desk and my work from home without Wi-Fi. So the connectivity isn't necessarily an issue. It's just how you actually like tie it into the field. Because is a majority of what you guys are working on new construction, or how much retrofit are you guys involved in?
I would say, at least for the stuff we're doing, it's a pretty even split for the most part. We personally, as a more theatrical dealer, don't get a lot of call for retrofit. We do get some. So a lot of the stuff we get involved with is more new construction, but we are still seeing a lot of retrofit. We have a lot of people reaching out for retrofit, which actually brings me to a question I had, is just to sort of take a step back for a second. If there's an end user or a client listening to this right now who's like, hey, I didn't even know I could potentially get these rebates, how does someone actually like start that process? Where should they be looking, regardless of what state or area they're in? How should they sort of start that process and begin looking to see what rebates they may be eligible for?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when figure out who your electric utility provider is, go onto that website. On their website, there will be some sort of tab that will either be called incentives or like a lot of, like, for Xcel Energy, it literally just says end user. You can click on that. There's a drop down that says rebates. Click on the rebates, and then you can go through, and all of the forms are there. There's lots of easy communication where what you're specifically looking for is the rebate application. So when you're looking at the application, there's, call it 6 to 8 pages worth of information. In the middle, there is a section that literally says standalone network controls, and then figure out, it'll tell you what the value is of the KW, or the cents per kWh drop, and then you just fill it in. And if you aren't comfortable with like looking through the actual PDF application, there's usually contact information where you can literally pull that contact information, email the utility and say, hey, I'm working on XYZ project that has controls. Are there any rebates available through you guys? And then they should be able to point you in the right direction from there too.
No, that's really helpful information. And I think, having groups like your group being able to kind of help as well, just kind of be there to be a rep in a way, helps smooth that process over even more. And so having ESCOs, having just independent groups from the utilities kind of helping pave that road as well, just really smooths that process along. But yeah, so to go back to your question of retrofit versus new installation, I mean, personally, I see the gamut. And so, I don't think there's, I guess if you wanted to really truly break it down, it would be a higher percentage of new installation to retrofit. But, sometimes I get pulled onto a project long after it's been installed, even though it's new build, and it feels like a retrofit because it's like, oh, yeah, you got to fix this.
Yeah. Why doesn't, yeah.
But, I mean, from your vantage point, you're seeing a lot more retrofits because of just the model that you're working in, right?
Well, and the product has come far enough along where it's easy enough to install 2x4 troffers that now connect to your phone instead of connecting to the wall. Where, fine, go for it. Like,
well, and this
it
is the
makes like the
mentality that I'm
functionality.
seeing from. Yeah, go ahead.
Go for it. Oh, go for it. Sorry.
Okay, this is the mentality that I'm seeing from ESCOs, contractors, and sort of these midstream. Is that the correct term, midstream? I always find it hard when I'm using that term, but maybe we can talk about that in a second. But midstream groups that are not like going to big box stores, but also aren't part of the manufacturing process, that can kind of go in between the two of those and get a better discount, also get involved in the rebate process. They're really interested in LLLC, luminaire level lighting controls, where you have embedded control devices within the fixture. Because of that component you were just talking about, you can connect to every single fixture with your phone. The startup becomes a lot more streamlined that way. And additionally, there's not as much logic to setting up the system, because you don't have to be like, oh, do I mount this sensor here? Do I mount this sensor there? Is there any other thing that, from your perspective, that really is kind of making that a very attractive element over traditional networked lighting control systems?
I think it's just the potential ease of it, where you're getting facilities people that have been in their position for 20, 30 years retiring. And then in that time, LED was implemented and nobody understands the controls.
Mm-hmm.
And then they start to fail, and then they need to be replaced, and they replace them. And then someone has to understand how that works. And if it's as simple as connecting it to a phone, that's a lot easier to understand than low voltage wiring, explaining that to somebody in a boardroom. Like, these are remote ballasted. What does that mean?
Do you see any drawbacks to this prevalence of LLLC?
I guess, will the internet get shut off? I don't know. Like, I think that like everything's just going to be interconnected. So it's like when electricians go to fix these, if they can't get the system online, then I don't know who's necessarily at fault. It's like, it's so deep into like, yes, this failed, but how did it fail? And can the electrician solve it? And if it's because components can't communicate to each other, or I guess you'll have different generations of the controls. So can they is it a PlayStation 3? Is it a PlayStation 4 that can play PlayStation 3 games? I don't really know, but because really the biggest thing is electricians being able to fix it.
Yes, right. So that was going to be part of my question is, are you seeing a lot of these systems installed? So obviously they're installed by electricians. Are they being then started up and, programmed by the electricians? Are you seeing third parties coming in and programming these so that things are functioning properly? Or how is that getting done to make sure that the end users are getting sort of what they wanted and expected out of the system?
Yeah, I'm seeing usually they'll do the initial setup and then let the building management team run with it. And usually, it's the electricians in the field figuring it out.
And do you see any, are the electricians doing a good job with that? Because that's one of the challenges that we run into with more specification grade equipment, is that the contractors really aren't capable of doing the startup or making sure that it's programmed correctly. So with these LLLCs, the point is that anybody can start these up. You don't need a factory certified technician for it. So are you seeing that is a realistic expectation?
I'm seeing,
Not to say
Yeah.
bad things about contractors.
Right.
No, and honestly, like there's a pocket of clients that'll order product that has the LLC and they're capable of connecting it themselves. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, and that's actually another interesting point is, who's purchasing, because I actually had an interesting
Right.
conversation with somebody out in Vegas who was saying that the vast majority of projects out there, the owners of the projects will purchase all the equipment and say, okay, install it all without any real it's a very
Yeah,
peculiar
they have
dynamic.
to hire you guys. Or like
Right.
they have to hire someone to commission the system, which is
Right.
literally like I have a client now that in the future they are going to need to replace 2 complex lighting systems, one that's already failed and another that literally can't be converted to LED because it was state-of-the-art CFL from 2012 that now needs to be replaced. And it's like they have they're hiring new maintenance people that they go into a mechanical room and there's just a panel open that is the only way to turn on and off fixtures. So it's like, and it's just one of those things where it's like, how much does it cost to fix this? Like, I only know 2 contractors. Like, I know 2. I can call 2 people that know how to solve that.
Right.
And
well, and
like that's go for it.
What does that conversation ultimately evolve into? Because I imagine that in their minds, they're like, okay, there should be some simple solution to this, right? Some low cost way of making this work. But you get pulled in. And so, like, what does that turn into as a conversation?
Well, a lot of the times they understand that this is going to be an expense because part of it has failed, which is a much easier conversation to have. But I like just being forward with people when things have failed. It's like, this is going to be it needs to get budgeted for. It doesn't matter what quarter it is. It's like, once this fails at 50% and you have occupants inside of your building that are going to complain about the light levels, that's when projects need to be implemented. It's like, and that's kind of the tipping point too. And it's kind of the similar with like, once 50% of the fluorescent has failed, then they notice.
Right. Right. And I guess that's the other thing there is when you reach that 50% criteria, that's a code requirement of, like, if you're going to modify 50% of something, you have to modify the entire thing to bring it up to code compliance. And so that makes sense. Are there times where people, when you reach that criteria, when they're just sort of like, can we, like, not have to meet that code requirement? But yeah, so it sounds like, really with these kinds of projects, you get brought in when there's an obvious failure, and that obvious failure leads to the conclusion that there needs to be a replacement, an overhaul of the system. And so what's your first step when you make that realization that there needs to be an overhaul in the system and there needs to be a system design or something needs to be communicated? Like, how do you approach this?
I just connect them directly to 2 different contractors that I know specialize in this field and will be able to handle any project that they could potentially have, and then make a smooth introduction and then let them run with it. And that's kind of how I work with kind of any type of project, where I may be the person that gets called because something failed, but there's also instances where we're the first person to do a full walkthrough of that building and we identified the failure, where I have to be very specific with how I communicate to upper management or facilities managers or the C-suite on, hey, 50% of your lighting is burned out. That has to, like, if you say that certain areas are burned out and they're in a building where they assume that everything was already LED, you have to be very specific with the communication there, because it can come off as you're not keeping up on maintenance. There's a bunch of failed stuff. What are you guys doing? What are you doing about it? So don't say that.
So I'm out of curiosity. So obviously having controls embedded in the fixtures and having something that can connect to your smartphone or other device does make it a lot easier for the end user, where they could, in theory, right, buy a new fixture if they have a failure, pop it in, add it into their system. They can do it themselves. It's not a specialty system that requires a technician to be dispatched at an additional cost to add a device. So out of curiosity, having done this now for a few years, have you had any sites that have had failures where it's now a couple years down the road? Because LLC for a lot of manufacturers is still fairly in its infancy, I would say. So have you seen projects that have had a failure where they now weren't able to get a replacement? Components were outdated. The control system actually changed. That system no longer exists altogether. We've seen some manufacturers just close up shop in the last few years. Have you experienced that at all?
Not controls, but for sure LED fixtures, like 100%. And like I understand the need for exchangeable components for kind of that exact thing. I just don't. I guess it goes as deep as controls as well, where I'm sure that there's fail points on sensors that aren't working anymore. It's like, and I mean, I guess I just see lots of failed photocells where it's like, okay, if photocells are failed everywhere, how many fail points are there in the LLC? But I feel like with certain brands, they've made the components easy enough to change out. Like for Keystone, it's literally just a 3.5 millimeter jack that goes in. And I feel like I haven't seen any fail points on those, which is great.
Yeah, and I think that is sort of a good point there. How do you connect these devices together? And I think, looking at the LLC world, there you're also just kind of embedding to the luminaire, and so if the whole luminaire needs to be replaced, that's the bigger challenge: is do you have an equitable luminaire that can be replaced for it, or has the luminaire company kind of closed up shop and gone away? Because with controls devices, we are seeing a much more interoperability, especially when it comes to LLC, and so finding that solution does become a lot easier once you've anchored which luminaire you're going to be using. But it is interesting, because that's something you got to keep in mind if you're going to keep everything in the same house, where you have brand X providing the luminaire and brand X providing the controls. Well, what happens when that brand X closes up shop on everything?
Right.
But it sounds like, from your vantage anyways, the lighting controls side of LLC really has been quite robust and able to weather a lot of what's coming through the industry, rather than the luminaire companies, which seem to be having a lot harder of a time.
Yeah. It's and it's such an interesting game of that interoperability. It's like going into systems, and it's a unison dimming system with 30 racks. If you replace that 500 watt halogen system with an LED, that load reduction will require you, or potentially require you, to combine the dimmer racks. You don't really learn that until you've seen one potentially go sideways, and to have that never happen again. And like it takes that field experience where it's like Stephen Mesh did his LLLC, or you guys are calling it LLC. That's easier.
Yeah,
I think it's
just a shorthand.
Like LLC. So like, and during that training, I was partnered with an electrician. So I was literally like watching his brain figure it all out on the iPad, connect 12 fixtures, like set up the zones, and then he's like, done. I got it figured out. I'm like, I'm glad I was with that guy. Because he was able to just like troubleshoot, and like I think that there was an initial connectivity issue where he's like, oh, okay, I have to troubleshoot this. So basically, like, he's troubleshooting in the field how to install 12 of these, where it's like he's a small electrician out of somewhere in Fargo, so he's servicing very much rural Minnesota.
Right.
And if a client says, hey, I've got these fixtures, can you install them? He has to go figure out how to install them. And when it's reputable companies that have diagrams, it's a lot easier.
Right. No, and I think that is the goal here, is to just make things easier on install, programming, and everything else. And so we are seeing that level of progress with LLC focused systems, which is interesting. So, but it's interesting to hear about being an attendee of a Steve Mesh presentation, because we've had Steve Mesh on the show 4 times now, and he talks about his presentations. And so, from your vantage, it sounds like this kind of education is really resourceful and really helpful for people to get an understanding, which one of the elements of that is hands-on. He's very proactive about getting people to put their hands on equipment and feel what it's like to install and program all of this.
Yeah.
And
it's
something
massive.
something you said was also about dimmer racks. Like, until you experience that, you're not going to really understand. And so, what specifically could we be doing in the industry to improve this knowledge gap? Because there's a huge number of people who have a lot of experience, and then there's a huge number of people who have no experience, and there doesn't seem to be any in between with that.
Well, it starts with education, because I'm not the one selling the service, and I'm not the electrician.
Right.
I'm guiding a client to someone that knows how to solve the problem, where I have to know enough to be able to even identify the problem. Where like, I can do it for lighting controls. It's like, if a client calls me and it's a LEED certified building, I need to be able to understand enough to ask the right questions to then get them to someone that could solve the problem. And it all starts with education. And there's a lot of other organizations with people that are in the field that have to understand this. It's like, there's a large demographic of people in lighting that didn't adopt LED right away.
Right.
Now they're not adopting controls right away. It's like, on new construction, it is what happens. Like, every new construction building has these controls. And if they fail 5 years from now, who is in the position to fix it? How do you identify it? Who represents the buildings that these systems are in? Like, it's such a huge demographic of people that interact with this thing every day, where the people that aren't immediately installing and designing it have to understand it. The people at the utilities that understand lighting and geothermal and different types of HVAC systems, a portion of that needs to understand how the equipment is controlled. And now it's on everything in LED. Like, it's like, lighting is the most invasive thing in everyone's life all the time. Like, it's like, I remember watching one of the Get a Grip podcasts of a guy who was talking about Wi-Fi enabled light bulbs that can quantum compute data, where it's like, that right there, that thing can quantum compute data and run the Wi-Fi for a secure network in my entire house. It's like, how do you control it? Is it just a zero? Like, is it dimmable?
So, bringing sort of HVAC and geothermal and even EV into this equation, right? Are you seeing a greater need where not just looking at lighting control is an individual thing? Are you seeing more requests for sort of holistic control? How can I tie my lighting controls into my HVAC, my geothermal, my EV for demand response, or whatever you might need?
I am personally not. I would have to be really deep into the weeds, but then spread across a lot of the U.S. to have kind of a large swath of nonprofit buildings that A, have a BMS system, but then B, have a lighting system that's complex enough to require controls. So,
well, and would you see
it's fun.
Would you say that it's a fair assumption here to say that most nonprofit organizations don't have BMSs, or at least don't have modern BMSs?
It's probably 50-50, where a lot of churches are manually controlled. Or like there's a good crop of buildings from, call it the 40s, 50s, 60s, where they've done renovation build outs where it's just a pneumatic control on the wall that controls the boiler system. And then the rooftop units might be connected, but a lot of the times those are just dedicated thermostats on the wall.
Yeah. So what are you seeing with the other 50% then?
They just they're they just have just a standard BMS system for
just for HVAC purposes, no real integration with other things.
No, it's just controlling the heating and cooling.
Right. So we still have a lot of opportunity with these nonprofit groups if they have the budget to be able to afford a more advanced modern BMS. But
But here, let me ask this question. So we work with a lot of hospitals because there's hospitals that are nonprofits. And so they have their existing BMS system, and then they have their lighting system that is not controlled through the BMS system. How am I communicating to the end user that connecting these two systems is something that would be advantageous for the building?
No, it's a great question. And, we've seen a lot of case studies coming out recently that prove that, even the most minimal connection between lighting controls and HVAC and BMS significantly improves energy savings. And so a lot of modern lighting control systems, especially the ones that have LLLC enabled in them, have the ability to be integrated with a BMS quite easily. And then how you leverage that data is the big question. And that might be the bigger cost of how it's programmed and the time to program. But, we are seeing that there is a significant improvement on energy efficiency of a building if you tie those two systems together. And so I think that's the big question of, that conversation. If you're the one driving that conversation, it tends to be a little bit harder of a sell, and it becomes a sales pitch in its own way. And so it seems like, oh, you're just trying to get more money out of this. And it's like, no, like, I'm serious. Like, this is more energy efficient, and it's very minimal in comparison. But, generally with nonprofits, at least from your perspective, and I would agree with that perspective, is that there's just not enough resources to support interest in that. And so it's just sort of like, what can we get away with? What's the bare minimum while still taking advantage of the rebates and the efficiencies that are out there?
Yeah.
But we're almost out of time here. So I just kind of want to summarize this, because this is really interesting stuff. We don't get a chance to talk to ESCOs and groups that are involved in these midstream programs. So really interesting stuff here that hopefully our listeners are taking advantage of. But when it comes to the rebate process and the incentive process, it really starts from the utilities. Utilities have a requirement to fund ways of improving energy efficiency. And one of those ways is through an ESCO and other third-party services to hire these groups and take advantage of rebate incentives that they're putting out and other resources that are available to the industry to help kind of guide that process. But they also have internal groups and internal procedures to facilitate. In fact, you still have to utilize those internal procedures to be able to take advantage of most of the rebates, either through prescriptive or custom. And so it's hard for an end user to navigate all of that. So it makes sense to hire somebody like you, or at least talk to somebody like you, and then get a contractor involved who can guide that process. But additionally, you know, when it comes to a nonprofit organization, which is what you're more often working with, you know, it's really hard because the budgets are really slim and the technology, for the most part, when you're dealing with a retrofit, is so outdated that you're dealing with a complete failure, or at least a partial failure of the system. So the system needs to be replaced anyways. And so it's like, okay, this needs to happen. But then it's now a question of like, well, how inexpensive can this be, as opposed to, and you did say, like, you know, we'll pay whatever it takes to get it done. But I imagine that, you know, if you come to them and say, well, it's going to be, you know, $1 million, they're going to be like, oh no, we can't afford that. We'll just live with no lights.
We'll just live with flickering.
Right. But, you know, so there is still this goal of low cost, but the added element there that they're not aware of and users aren't aware of, but you're privy to and the contractors are privy to, is ease of installation, ease of use. And so most modern lighting control systems have sort of this tipping point of where is that complexity too complex versus where is that ease of use to, like, are you axing out too much of the system to be able to accommodate. And so it seems like LLC has kind of struck that perfect balance of complexity and ease of use. And so that's why we're seeing a much higher interest from ESCOs, from contractors, from just wholesale distribution towards this technology because of that factor. And it, you know, from the information we've heard and from what you're observing, it really is, in a lot of cases, that easy to just hand the contractor the equipment and say, okay, install it, go ahead. Now, does that mean that we're being able to leverage it as best as possible? No, but it means that it's functional. And that's been the sticking point in our industry for so long is, you know, yeah, I bought this really awesome lighting control system, but it doesn't work. And so we're starting to see that experience phase out with LLC. So it's really, you know, this is a really interesting pivot point, I think we are in the industry, where there is this larger focus. And the other thing that I didn't mention is the fact that because LEDs are pretty ubiquitous at this point, even if there's huge incentives to swap out from an older conventional format to LED, odds are you've already upgraded. And so the next step is to take advantage of rebates, is to look at the lighting control system. And so that's another reason we're seeing more focus on lighting controls nowadays, is because of this fact that just all paths are heading in that direction regardless. Did I miss anything from my summary there?
No, it's I agree on it. Well, I guess you were just recapping what I was saying, but honestly, yeah, you're spot on. It's most of this is just a game of education and like your wrap up of engaging with utilities. I refer to it as playing in their sandbox, because everyone is different. Every utility is different, every process flow, but in the end, all they need is an invoice and the spec sheet for the product. And if you have those two things, you can get everything else done.
All right. One last quick question for you, because I realized I didn't ask this earlier. Is these rebates, right? They're pools of money, and eventually those pools do run out. Is there an ideal time for people to apply? Like, what are sort of the budget cycles for those rebates?
So most utilities will have a hard deadline of December 31st, and a lot of rebates need to be within that fiscal year. So January 1st to December 31st. Some utilities will have a longer time frame where it's 24 months, where there is a 24-month go back on the date of the invoice. So say it's May 14th of 2023. I would need to submit that rebate today for it to qualify. If I do it tomorrow, it doesn't count. And so each utility is a little different. I know that like Mid-America in like Iowa and kind of central US, they have a 90-day pre-approval. So there's certain utilities where you need to get your project on their time or like on their wavelength before you sign off, start and go. And so that's where going on the utilities website, kind of figuring out where you can figure out what needs to happen, because it's different everywhere.
Yeah. All right. So it really is the first step, and is the ideal step, is to reach out to the utility, go to their website, and if you're still confused, call the agent from whoever's listed on the site to get the information that you need. Find out what sort of those cycles and rules are. What do I need to pre-apply? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that prior to moving forward with the project? And I think that's all really important stuff for everyone to know, especially as they look at more and more of these rebates, because there may be some of our listeners who still don't even know that these programs are out there and exist for retrofits or for new projects. Yeah.
Most of them are free. They're funded by the utility.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's worth taking advantage of those. Ryan, thank you so much, man. This is a fantastic conversation. I hope our listeners got as much out of it as I did. Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys letting me on. It's fun to interact with people that are way more deep in the weeds on like certain aspects of projects, because it's like my knowledge base only goes as deep as the question someone asks me. And once you get into controls, it's, oh boy, I'm glad you guys are really smart. It makes my job easier.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. I will close us out and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes, newsfeed, merch store, etc., etc. Definitely worth checking out if you haven't seen it yet. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode, which we could not do these episodes without, MW Connect. You may know them as McWong, but they have rebranded as MW Connect. So check them out, mwconnect.us. They actually have solutions along the lines of LLLC that we just talked about, worth checking out if you are unfamiliar with their product lines that meet these needs for retrofit and new installation. Check them out, mwconnect.us. But thank you for joining me. And Ryan, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.